The Grand Harrington Hotel stood tall in the middle of the city like a palace from another time. Its walls were covered in cream-colored stone, and huge glass windows reflected the afternoon sun. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high you had to tilt your head all the way back to see them. The floors were made of polished marble, and everywhere you looked, there were fresh flowers in golden vases. This was a place where rich people came to celebrate, where business deals were made over expensive wine, and where a single night stay cost more than what most families spent on groceries in a month. On this particular Thursday afternoon, the hotel was buzzing with activity. Workers rushed back and forth carrying boxes of decorations. Florists arranged roses on every table in the grand ballroom. Chefs in white coats shouted orders in the kitchen as they prepared a feast fit for royalty. Tonight was the biggest night of the year at the hotel. The Harrington Foundation was hosting its annual charity gala, and over 300 of the city's wealthiest and most powerful people were expected to attend. Each ticket cost $500, and every cent was supposed to go to children's education programs across the country. In the middle of all this chaos, sitting quietly in a corner of the hotel lobby, was a little girl named Mei Lin. She was 8 years old, with black hair pulled back into two neat braids tied with red ribbons. Her dress was simple, a light blue cotton one with small white flowers printed on it. If you looked closely, you could see a tiny tear near the bottom hem that had been carefully sewn back together with matching thread. Her shoes were clean but worn, the kind that had been polished many times to hide the scuffs. Mei Lin sat in a large leather chair, her small legs dangling above the floor because she was too short to touch it. On her lap was an old book about music theory that she had borrowed from the public library 3 weeks ago. The pages were yellow and some of them were falling out, but she treated it like treasure. Her eyes moved slowly across the words, and every now and then, her fingers would tap against her knee as if she was playing invisible notes. The reason Mei Lin was at this fancy hotel was simple. Her mother worked here. Chen had been a housekeeper at the Grand Harrington for almost 6 years now. She cleaned rooms, changed sheets, scrubbed bathrooms, and made sure everything was spotless for the guests. It was hard work. Her back hurt most nights, and her hands were rough and dry from all the cleaning chemicals. But she never complained. This job paid the bills. It put food on the table. It kept a roof over their heads in the small one-bedroom apartment they called home. Today, Chen had no choice but to bring Mei Lin to work. The woman who usually watched her daughter after school had called that morning with bad news. Her own mother was sick, and she had to leave town immediately. There was no one else Chen could call. She had no family in this city. Her husband had passed away when Mei Lin was only 3 years old, leaving her to raise their daughter alone. So she had packed some books and snacks into Mei Lin's backpack and brought her along, hoping her supervisor would understand. Thankfully, he did. The hotel manager, a kind older man with gray hair and gentle eyes, told Chen that Mei Lin could wait in the lobby as long as she stayed quiet and didn't bother the guests. Chen had hugged her daughter tight and told her to be good. Then she had disappeared into the service elevator, leaving Mei Lin alone with her books. But Mei Lin didn't mind being alone. In fact, she was used to it. Most days after school, she would sit by herself in their tiny apartment, doing homework at the kitchen table while waiting for her mother to come home. She had learned to be patient. She had learned to keep herself busy. And most importantly, she had learned to dream. More than anything in the world, Mei Lin loved music, especially piano music. It had started when she was 5 years old. She and her mother had been walking past a music store in a nicer part of town when Mei Lin heard something that made her stop in her tracks. Through the open door of the shop, someone was playing the piano. The melody was soft and flowing, like water running over smooth stones. Mei Lin had stood there on the sidewalk, completely frozen, her eyes wide with wonder. She had never heard anything so beautiful in her entire life. From that day on, she was obsessed. She would beg her mother to take her past that music store whenever they could. She would sit outside the door and listen for hours. When her mother explained that piano lessons cost money they didn't have, Mei Lin didn't cry. Instead, she found another way. The public library had computers that anyone could use for free. Mei Lin discovered that there were videos online that taught you how to play piano. She watched hundreds of them. She memorized the position of every key. She learned about scales and chords and rhythm. She studied pieces by composers with names she couldn't pronounce at first, but eventually learned to say perfectly. Chopin, Debussy, Beethoven, Mozart. But watching videos wasn't enough. She needed to practice, so Mei Lin did something clever. She took a large piece of cardboard and drew a piano keyboard on it. 88 keys. Just like a real piano. Each one carefully drawn with a black marker. She taped this cardboard keyboard to her bedroom wall, right next to her small bed. Every night, before sleep, and every morning before school, she would stand in front of it and practice. Her fingers would move across the drawn keys, pressing down on the cardboard as if it were real. She would close her eyes and imagine the sound. In her mind, the music was perfect. Her mother would sometimes stand in the doorway and watch, her heart breaking a little bit each time. She wanted so badly to give her daughter a real piano. She wanted to sign her up for lessons with a proper teacher. But the money simply wasn't there. Every dollar Chen earned went toward rent, food, electricity, and the medicines she needed for her own health problems that she hid from Mei Lin. There was nothing left over for dreams. But Mei Lin never complained. Not once. She just kept practicing on her cardboard piano, kept reading her library books, and kept believing that someday, somehow, things would change. What nobody knew was that Mei Lin had a secret. 3 months ago, she had discovered something wonderful. The hotel where her mother worked had an old piano. It sat in a small room near the back of the building, a place that used to be a lounge for guests, but had been converted into a break room for employees. The piano was dusty and slightly out of tune. Some of the keys stuck when you pressed them. But to Mei Lin, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The first time she touched it, her hands were shaking. She pressed one key, just one, and the sound that came out made her want to cry. It was real. It was actually real. After years of practicing on cardboard, she was finally touching an actual piano. At first, she was scared. She didn't know if she was allowed to play it. What if someone caught her? What if her mother got in trouble? But she couldn't stay away. Every time Chen brought her to the hotel, Mei Lin would sneak into that little room when no one was looking. She would sit at the bench, take a deep breath, and play. And something magical happened. All those years of practicing on cardboard, all those hours of watching videos and reading books, all that time spent imagining the music in her head, it had actually worked. Her fingers knew exactly where to go. The melodies she had played 1,000 times in her imagination now flowed out of the real piano, as if they had been trapped inside it all along, just waiting for her to set them free. She wasn't perfect, of course. She made mistakes. Her technique wasn't polished, like the pianists she watched online. But there was something in her playing that was hard to explain. It came from somewhere deep inside her, a place where all her loneliness and hope and love for her mother lived. When Mei Lin played, she wasn't just pressing keys. She was telling a story. What she didn't know was that someone had heard her. 1 week ago, the hotel's general manager had been walking down a back hallway when he heard music coming from the old break room. He had stopped, confused, because as far as he knew, nobody used that piano anymore. Curious, he had quietly pushed open the door, just enough to peek inside. What he saw made him catch his breath. There was the little girl, the housekeeper's daughter, sitting at the piano with her eyes closed. Her small fingers danced across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone her age. The piece she was playing was Clair de Lune by Debussy, one of the most difficult and beautiful compositions ever written, and she was playing it from memory, without any sheet music in front of her. The manager had stood there for a full 5 minutes, completely hypnotized. When the song ended, he quietly backed away before the girl could see him. He didn't say anything to anyone. He wasn't sure what to say. But he filed that moment away in his memory, thinking that someday, somehow, it might matter. He had no idea that someday would come so soon. Upstairs in the grand ballroom, while Mei Lin sat reading in the lobby, disaster was about to strike. The hired pianist, a well-known musician who had been paid $5,000 to perform during dinner, had just collapsed backstage. The hotel's medic rushed to help him, but it was clear he couldn't perform. He was being taken to the hospital. The event coordinator, a woman named Patricia, who had spent 6 months planning this gala, felt her whole world falling apart. 300 guests were arriving in less than 2 hours. The mayor would be here, business leaders, celebrities, and she had no music. She grabbed her phone and started calling every musician she knew. Nobody answered. Nobody was available on such short notice. She could feel panic rising in her chest, like a wave about to crash. That's when the general manager walked into the ballroom. He had just heard about the pianist situation, and he had an idea. It was crazy. It was risky. It might not work at all, but he had seen something special in that little girl. Something that couldn't be taught or bought. He took Patricia aside and told her about Mei Lin. At first, she laughed, thinking he was joking. A child? An 8-year-old girl who had never taken a single lesson? At the Harrington Foundation Gala, in front of the most important people in the city? But the manager wasn't laughing. He looked her straight in the eyes and said, "I know it sounds impossible, but trust me, that little girl can play." Patricia stared at him for a long moment. She had no other options. The clock was ticking. The guests were coming. And she was completely, utterly desperate. She took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. "Okay," she said. Patricia walked quickly through the hotel corridors, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a nervous heartbeat. The general manager struggled to keep up with her, even though he was the one leading the way. Both of them knew they were running out of time. Every minute that passed was another minute closer to disaster. When they reached the lobby, Patricia spotted the little girl immediately. She was still sitting in that oversized leather chair, her small body almost swallowed by the cushions. The music theory book was open on her lap, and she was completely absorbed in whatever she was reading. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the chaos happening just a few floors above her. Patricia felt a knot form in her stomach. This was insane. This child, with her simple blue dress and her borrowed library book, was supposed to save the most important event of the year? She almost turned around and walked away right there. But then she remembered the panic in the ballroom, the empty piano bench, and the 300 wealthy guests who expected perfection. She had nothing to lose. She approached the chair slowly, not wanting to startle the girl. When she was close enough, she knelt down so that she was at eye level with her. The girl looked up from her book, her dark eyes curious but cautious. "Hello there," Patricia said, trying to make her voice soft and friendly, even though her heart was racing. "My name is Patricia. I work here at the hotel. What's your name?" "Mei Lin," the girl answered quietly. Her voice was small but clear. "That's a beautiful name. I heard that your mother works here too. She must be very proud of you." Mei Lin nodded but didn't say anything. She seemed unsure about why this stranger was talking to her. Patricia glanced at the general manager, who gave her an encouraging nod. She turned back to the little girl and took a deep breath. "Mei Lin, I'm going to ask you something that might sound very strange. And I want you to know that it's completely okay to say no. You won't be in any trouble either way. Do you understand?" The girl nodded again, her eyes growing wider with curiosity. "I heard from a very reliable source that you know how to play the piano. Is that true?" For a moment, Mei Lin's face showed a flash of fear. She thought she was in trouble. She thought someone had caught her, sneaking into the break room and playing the old piano when she wasn't supposed to. Her fingers gripped the edges of her book tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't mean to cause any problems. I just wanted to practice. The piano was just sitting there, and nobody was using it, and I thought maybe it would be okay if I was really quiet and— Patricia held up her hand gently, stopping the flood of worried words. Sweetheart, you're not in trouble. Not at all. In fact, the person who heard you play said you were absolutely wonderful. He said you were one of the most talented young musicians he had ever seen. Maylin's mouth fell open slightly. She didn't know how to respond to that. Nobody had ever called her talented before. Nobody except her mother. And mothers were supposed to say nice things. It didn't count the same way. Here's the thing, Patricia continued, leaning in a little closer. We have a big dinner happening here tonight. A very important dinner, with lots of guests. We had a pianist who was supposed to play music during the meal, but he got sick and had to go to the hospital. Now, we don't have anyone to play, and I was hoping that maybe you might be willing to help us out. Why? I was hoping. Why? Maylin blinked several times, as if she was trying to make sense of words that didn't quite fit together. You want me to play? At the dinner? In front of people? Yes, I know it's a lot to ask. I know you're young. But we really need someone, and I believe you can do it. Would you at least think about it? The little girl sat very still for a long moment. Her mind was spinning with 1,000 thoughts at once. Play piano in front of strangers? In front of rich, important people? What if she made mistakes? What if they laughed at her? What if her mother got angry? But underneath all that fear, there was something else. A tiny spark of excitement that she couldn't ignore. This was the chance she had dreamed about. All those nights practicing on cardboard, all those hours watching videos and imagining what it would feel like to perform for a real audience. Was this really happening? I need to ask my mama, Maylin said finally. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Patricia nodded. Of course. Let's go find her together. They found Chen on the 4th floor, pushing a cleaning cart down a long hallway. When she saw her daughter walking toward her with 2 hotel managers, her face went pale. Her first thought was that something was wrong. Had Maylin gotten hurt? Was she being fired? Had her daughter done something to upset a guest? What happened? Chen asked, her voice tight with worry. Is everything okay? Into there? Is everything okay? Into there? Patricia stepped forward and explained the situation as calmly as she could. She told Chen about the gala, about the pianist getting sick, about the desperate need for someone to play. She told her that the general manager had heard Maylin playing the old piano and was incredibly impressed. She told her that they believed her daughter had a real gift. Chen listened without speaking. Her face went through a series of emotions, from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like pain. When Patricia finished, there was a heavy silence in the hallway. She's just a child, Chen said finally. Her voice was soft but firm. She's never had a real lesson. She's never performed for anyone. These people at your dinner, they are important people, wealthy people. They will expect perfection. What if she makes a mistake? What if they are cruel to her? I cannot let my daughter be humiliated in front of strangers. Patricia nodded, understanding the mother's concerns completely. I promise you, we will protect her. If anything goes wrong, we will handle it. But Mrs. Chen, I believe your daughter is special. The way she plays, it's not something you can teach. It comes from the heart. Please, give her a chance to show the world what she can do. Chen looked down at her daughter. Maylin was staring up at her with those big, hopeful eyes. Chen knew that look. It was the same look Maylin had given her 5 years ago, standing outside that music store, listening to a stranger play piano through an open door. It was the look of someone who had found something they loved and couldn't let go. Mama, Maylin said softly, I've been practicing for so long. Every day on my cardboard piano. Every time I come here with you. I know I'm not perfect, but I really want to try. Please let me try. Chen felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She thought about all the sacrifices she had made over the years, the extra shifts, the aching back, the medicines she sometimes skipped to save money. She had done all of it so that her daughter could have a better life. And here was a chance, a real chance, for Mei Lin to shine. But she was also terrified. She knew how harsh the world could be to people like them, people without money or connections, people who didn't come from the right families or go to the right schools. What if those rich guests looked at her daughter and saw only a poor little girl in a second-hand dress? What if they dismissed her before she even played a single note? "If I may," the general manager said gently, stepping forward. He had been quiet until now, watching the exchange between mother and daughter. "Mrs. Chen, I understand your fears, but I want you to know something. I have worked in this hotel for over 20 years. I have heard many musicians play at our events, professional musicians with degrees and awards and years of training, and none of them, not a single one, has ever made me stop in my tracks the way your daughter did." He paused, his voice growing softer. "When I heard her play that piece by Debussy, I felt something I haven't felt in a very long time. I felt moved. I felt like I was listening to something pure and true and beautiful. Your daughter has a gift, Mrs. Chen. A rare gift. And I think it would be a shame to hide it." Chen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at her daughter again, at the hope shining in her young face, and she made a decision. "How much will you pay her?" she asked. Patricia blinked, surprised by the question. Then, a small smile crossed her face. This mother was smart. She wasn't going to let anyone take advantage of her child. "The original pianist was being paid $2,000 for the evening," Patricia said. "We will pay Mei Lin the same amount. $2,000. Chen felt her knees go weak. That was more than she made in a month. That was enough to pay off the medical bills she had been hiding from her daughter. That was enough to finally buy Mei Lin a real piano, or at least real lessons with a real teacher. That was enough to change their lives. She knelt down and took her daughter's hands in her own. They were so small, those hands. Small, but strong. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked. "It's okay to say no. I won't be disappointed. I will never be disappointed in you." Absent, Mei Lin squeezed her mother's hands. "I'm not scared, Mama. The piano is my friend. It has always been my friend. And I have so many songs inside me that want to come out." Chen pulled her daughter into a tight hug. She held her for a long moment, trying to memorize the feeling of holding her child, this brave little girl who had taught herself to play piano on a piece of cardboard and never once complained about what she didn't have. "Okay," she whispered into her daughter's hair. "Okay. You can do it." When they pulled apart, Mei Lin's face was glowing. She looked up at Patricia with a determination that seemed far beyond her 8 years. "I'll play for you," she said. "I'll play my very best." Patricia felt a wave of relief wash over her, but there was still so much to do. The guests would start arriving in less than an hour. She needed to get Mei Lin ready, brief her on what to expect, make sure she had everything she needed. "Come with me," she said, extending her hand to the little girl. "Let's get you prepared." As they walked toward the elevator, Chen watched them go. Her heart was pounding with a mixture of pride and fear. She wanted to run after her daughter and tell her to stop, to come back, to forget about the whole thing. But she also knew that this was Mei Lin's moment. This was the chance they had both been waiting for without even knowing it. The general manager stood beside her. "She's going to be wonderful," he said quietly. "I can feel it." Chen nodded, unable to speak. She clasped her hands together and whispered a prayer, the same prayer she said every night before bed. "Please, protect my daughter. Please, let her dreams come true." Upstairs, Patricia led Mei Lin through a maze of hallways until they reached a small dressing room behind the ballroom stage. It was filled with lights and mirrors and racks of fancy clothes. Mei Lin had never seen anything like it. "Okay, sweetheart," Patricia said, kneeling down again to meet her at eye level. "I need to explain a few things. Tonight, there will be a lot of people in the ballroom, very important people, but I don't want you to think about them. I want you to pretend they're not even there. Just focus on the piano. Focus on the music. Play the songs you love, the songs you've been practicing. Can you do that for me?" Mei Lin nodded solemnly. "I can do that. Good. Now, the piano you'll be playing is very special. It's called a Steinway grand piano. It's much bigger and nicer than the one in the break room. The keys might feel a little different, but I'm sure you'll figure it out quickly. You're a smart girl." Mei Lin's eyes widened at the mention of a Steinway. She had seen pictures of them in her library books. They were the most beautiful pianos in the world. She couldn't believe she was actually going to touch one. "How long do I need to play?" she asked. "About an hour. Maybe a little more. Just background music while people eat dinner. Nothing too fast or loud. Soft, beautiful melodies. Do you know any pieces like that?" A small smile crossed Mei Lin's face. "I know lots of pieces like that. Clair de Lune, Gymnopédie, Moonlight Sonata, Prelude in C, Major. I can play for hours." Patricia felt her tension ease just a little bit. This girl knew what she was doing. Maybe, just maybe, this was going to work. "One more thing," Patricia said, her voice growing serious. "Some of the guests might look at you and wonder what a little girl is doing on stage. Some of them might be surprised or confused, but I need you to ignore them. I need you to believe in yourself, no matter what anyone else thinks." "Can you do that?" Mei Lin was quiet for a moment. Then she lifted her chin and looked Patricia straight in the eyes. "My mama always tells me that what's inside is more important than what's outside. She says that our worth comes from our hearts, not from our clothes or our money or where we live. I believe her, and I believe in my music." Patricia felt a lump form in her throat. This little girl, this remarkable little girl, had more wisdom and courage than most adults she knew. In that moment, she stopped worrying about the gala. She stopped thinking about the wealthy guests and their expectations. She realized that whatever happened tonight, Mei Lin was going to be just fine. "You know what?" Patricia said, standing up and brushing off her skirt. "I think you're going to be amazing." The clock on the wall showed that there was only 30 minutes left before the first guests would arrive. The kitchen was in full swing. The decorations were in place. The waiters were polishing glasses and reviewing their assignments. And in a small dressing room behind the stage, an 8-year-old girl in a simple blue dress was preparing to do something no one expected. She was preparing to change everything. The doors to the grand ballroom opened at exactly 7 o'clock. One by one, the guests began to arrive, stepping inside like royalty, entering a palace. The women wore dresses that sparkled under the chandelier lights, diamonds glittering at their necks and ears. The men wore suits that probably cost more than what most people earned in a year, their shoes polished to a mirror shine. These were the most powerful people in the city: business owners, politicians, celebrities, old money families whose names had been famous for generations. Waiters in crisp white uniforms moved through the crowd, offering champagne from silver trays. The smell of expensive perfume and cologne filled the air. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings as old friends greeted each other and new connections were made. This was the Harrington Foundation Gala, and everyone who was anyone wanted to be here. At the center of it all, sitting at the head table, was a man named Richard Harrington. He was 62 years old, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that never seemed to miss a thing. He was the founder and CEO of Harrington Industries, one of the largest companies in the country. He was also the founder of the Harrington Foundation, the charity organization hosting tonight's event. On paper, He had everything a person could want. Wealth beyond imagination. Power that could move mountains. A name that opened every door. But if you looked closely, past the expensive suit and the confident smile, you might notice something else. A tiredness in his eyes. A heaviness around his shoulders. Richard Harrington had spent his entire life building an empire. And somewhere along the way, he had forgotten why he started building in the first place. Tonight, like every night, he sat at his table and played the role that was expected of him. He shook hands with donors. He made small talk with politicians. He smiled for photos and gave his approval to various plans and projects. It was all so routine, so empty, so utterly meaningless. He couldn't remember the last time something had truly moved him. As the room filled up and the buzz of conversation grew louder, Richard noticed that the grand piano at the front of the room was empty. The scheduled performer should have been doing a sound check by now. He turned to his assistant, a nervous young man who always seemed to be holding a clipboard. "Where's the pianist?" Richard asked, his voice low and controlled. The assistant swallowed hard. "There was a situation, sir. The original performer had a medical emergency. He had to be taken to the hospital." Richard's jaw tightened. "And you didn't think to inform me of this?" "We've handled it, sir. We found a replacement. Miss Patricia assured me that everything is under control." Richard's eyes narrowed. He didn't like surprises. He didn't like things that weren't part of the plan. But he also knew that Patricia was competent. If she said it was handled, it probably was. He nodded curtly and turned back to his guests, pushing the matter from his mind. But he would think about it again very soon. Backstage, Mei Lin stood in the shadows, peeking through a gap in the curtains at the sea of people in the ballroom. Her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. She had never seen so many fancy people in one place. They looked like characters from a movie, glamorous and untouchable, and completely from another world. For a moment, the fear came rushing back. What was she doing here? She was just a little girl from a tiny apartment. Her mother was a housekeeper. She had never owned a real piano, never taken a single lesson, never performed for anyone except the empty break room. These people would take one look at her and laugh. They would see right through her. She felt her hands start to shake. Her breathing became fast and shallow. She wanted to run away, to hide, to tell Patricia that she had changed her mind and couldn't do it. But then she thought about her mother. She thought about all those long nights when her mama came home exhausted, barely able to stand, but still found the energy to make dinner and help with homework and kiss her goodnight. She thought about the sacrifices, the struggles, the love that never wavered no matter how hard things got. She couldn't let her mother down. She wouldn't. Mei Lin closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She imagined she was back in the break room, sitting at the old piano with its sticky keys and dusty surface. She imagined the silence of that empty space, the peace that came when it was just her, and the music. Nobody watching, nobody judging, just the notes flowing out of her like water from a spring. When she opened her eyes again, she felt calmer. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her breathing had slowed down. She was ready. Patricia appeared beside her, looking both anxious and hopeful. "It's time, sweetheart. Are you sure you're okay?" Mei Lin nodded. She didn't trust her voice to speak, so she just nodded. Patricia took her hand and led her toward the stage. The curtains parted, and suddenly, Mei Lin was walking across the polished floor toward the most beautiful piano she had ever seen. It was a Steinway Model D, 9 feet long, with a glossy black surface that reflected the chandeliers above. It looked like something from a dream. The room didn't fall silent immediately. People were still talking, still laughing, still clinking their glasses. Most of them didn't even notice the small figure approaching the piano, but a few did. A few turned their heads and frowned in confusion. Why was there a child on stage? Was this some kind of performance? A joke? Richard Harrington looked up from his conversation, and saw the little girl climbing onto the piano bench. His first reaction was annoyance. What was Patricia thinking? This was supposed to be a sophisticated event, not a school talent show. He was about to call for his assistant when something made him stop. The girl was adjusting the bench, scooting it forward so her feet could reach the pedals. Her movements were careful and deliberate, like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. There was no nervousness in her posture, no hesitation in her gestures. She knew exactly what she was doing. Richard found himself leaning forward, curious despite his skepticism. Mei Lin placed her hands on the keys. They were smoother than the old piano in the break room, cool and perfectly weighted. She could feel the quality of the instrument, the way it seemed to breathe beneath her fingertips. This was a piano that wanted to sing. She closed her eyes and remembered the first piece she had ever taught herself. The one that had changed her life. The one she had played over and over again on her cardboard keyboard until she could hear every note in her sleep. Clair de Lune. Her fingers pressed down, and the first notes floated into the air. The effect was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Heads turned toward the stage as if pulled by an invisible force. The music was soft and gentle, like moonlight streaming through a window, like a whisper between old friends, like the feeling of coming home after a long journey. But it was more than that. There was something in the way this little girl played that was different from anything these guests had heard before. It wasn't perfect, in the technical sense. A trained ear might notice a slightly rushed passage here, a hesitation there. But perfection wasn't what made music beautiful. This girl played with her whole heart, with a rawness and honesty that couldn't be faked or taught. Richard Harrington felt something stir inside his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in many, many years. A tightness, a warmth, a strange sensation of being pulled backward through time. As the melody continued, his mind began to drift. He saw images he hadn't thought about in decades. A small apartment above a tailor's shop. Clothes hanging on a line to dry. The smell of bread baking in a cramped kitchen. And his mother, sitting at her sewing machine late into the night, her fingers moving steadily as she stitched together pieces of fabric to put food on their table. His mother had loved music. She couldn't afford piano lessons or concert tickets, but she would hum melodies while she worked. Simple tunes, nothing fancy, but they had filled their small home with warmth. Sometimes she would close her eyes and sway gently to the rhythm of her own voice, and young Richard would watch her from the doorway, mesmerized. Someday, she used to tell him, you're going to do great things. You're going to show the world what you're made of. And when you're rich and famous, don't you forget where you came from. Don't you forget who believed in you first. He had promised her he wouldn't forget. He had looked her in the eyes and sworn that he would always remember. But he had forgotten. Somewhere between the first million and the first billion, between the magazine covers and the awards ceremonies, between the mergers and acquisitions and endless board meetings, he had lost touch with the boy who used to sit on the floor of that tiny apartment and dream about making his mother proud. His mother had died 15 years ago. Heart failure. It happened suddenly, just a few months after he had closed the biggest deal of his career. He had been in a meeting when he got the call. He remembered telling his secretary to hold all his appointments, then sitting alone in his office for 2 hours, staring at the wall. He had cried at the funeral. But after that, he had locked away the grief and thrown himself back into work. It was easier that way. It was easier not to feel. Now, sitting in this ballroom surrounded by people who wanted his money and his influence, listening to this little girl play the piano with more soul than anyone he had ever heard, all those buried feelings came rushing back. The grief, the guilt, the terrible realization that he had broken his promise to the one person who had truly loved him. Richard's hand trembled as he set down his champagne glass. He was vaguely aware that people at his table were staring at him, but he didn't care. He couldn't take his eyes off the small figure at the piano. Who was this child? Where had she come from? How was it possible that someone so young could play with such depth, such emotion, such understanding of what it meant to feel something deeply? The piece built slowly, the notes becoming richer and more complex. Mei Lin's eyes were still closed. She wasn't thinking about the audience, or the fancy ballroom, or the pressure of the moment. She was somewhere else entirely. She was in the break room with its dusty piano. She was in her tiny bedroom with her cardboard keyboard. She was with her mother, feeling the warmth of her embrace and the strength of her love. The music was her story. It was the story of a little girl who had nothing but dreams. A little girl who practiced every day, even when there was no real piano to practice on. A little girl who refused to give up, refused to complain, refused to let her circumstances define what she could become. In the audience, more than one person felt tears forming in their eyes. They didn't know why exactly. The song was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. It was as if this child had reached inside their hearts and found something they had hidden away, something they had tried to forget. A woman in a red dress dabbed at her eyes with a silk napkin. She was thinking about her own daughter, the one she was always too busy to spend time with. The one he had let slip away because he was too focused on building his career. A young businessman was thinking about the dreams he had abandoned when he decided to take the safe path. Everyone in that room was carrying something. Old wounds, forgotten hopes, broken promises, and somehow, this little girl's music was bringing it all to the surface. Mei Lin reached the final passage of Clair de Lune. The notes slowed down, becoming softer and more delicate, like the last light of day fading into evening. She held the final chord for a long moment, letting it ring out until it dissolved into silence. When she opened her eyes, she was surprised to see that the entire room had gone completely still. Nobody was talking. Nobody was moving. Every single person was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a terrible moment, she thought she had done something wrong. Maybe they hated it. Maybe they were angry that a child had been allowed to play at their fancy event. Maybe she had embarrassed herself and her mother beyond repair. But then she noticed something else. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. At the head table, the older man with the silver hair, the important-looking one everyone seemed to respect, was crying. Not just a single tear, but real tears, streaming down his weathered face without shame or restraint. And he wasn't the only one. All around the ballroom, men and women in their expensive clothes and glittering jewelry were wiping their eyes. Some were smiling through their tears. Some were holding hands with the person next to them. Some were staring into space, lost in memories that the music had awakened. Mei Lin didn't understand what was happening. She had just played a song, the same song she had played 100 times before in that dusty break room. How could a simple song make so many people cry? What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand yet, was that she had just given these people something money couldn't buy. She had given them a moment of pure, honest emotion in a world that was often too busy, too cynical, too afraid to feel anything real. She had reminded them of what it meant to be human. Patricia was watching from the side of the stage, her hand pressed against her heart. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. This little girl, this self-taught pianist in her simple blue dress, had just moved an entire room of hardened business people to tears. It was impossible. It was a miracle. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever witnessed. Mei Lin took a small breath and placed her hands on the keys again. The night was just beginning, and she had so many more songs to share. She thought about her mother. Somewhere in this hotel, probably worried sick about how things were going. She wished she could tell her that everything was okay. More than okay. Because for the first time in her life, Mei Lin felt like she truly belonged somewhere. She belonged at this piano, making this music, touching the hearts of people she had never met. This was what she was meant to do. She began her next piece, and the notes rose into the air like birds taking flight. And in the audience, Richard Harrington watched her with tears still wet on his face. feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. The dinner continued, but something had changed in the ballroom. The atmosphere was different now, warmer somehow, softer. People spoke in quieter voices. They seemed more thoughtful, more present, more connected to the moment. And through it all, the music flowed like a gentle river, carrying everyone along on its current. Mei Lin played piece after piece, each one chosen carefully from the library of songs she had stored in her memory over the years. Gymnopédie by Satie, with its dreamy, floating melodies. The Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven, with its deep, searching sadness. Pieces by Chopin that danced across the keys like falling leaves. She played for over an hour, and not once did she look at any sheet music. Every note came from her heart. In the back of the ballroom, standing near the service entrance, Chen watched her daughter with tears streaming freely down her face. She had abandoned her cleaning cart the moment she heard the music start, sneaking down to catch a glimpse of her little girl on that grand stage. What she saw took her breath away. This was not the Mei Lin she knew. This was not the shy child who practiced on cardboard and borrowed library books. This was someone else entirely. Someone powerful. Someone luminous. Someone who was born to sit at that piano and make the world more beautiful. A hand touched Chen's shoulder, and she turned to see the hotel's general manager standing beside her. He was smiling, his eyes also glistening with moisture. "I told you she was special," he whispered. Chen could only nod. Her heart was too full for words. At the head table, Richard Harrington had barely touched his food. The filet mignon sat cooling on his plate. The wine remained untasted in his glass. He couldn't focus on anything except the music. Each new piece seemed to reach deeper inside him, unearthing memories he had buried long ago. He thought about his childhood in that small apartment above the tailor's shop. Money had always been tight. His father had left when Richard was just 7 years old, disappearing one night without a word of goodbye. After that, it was just Richard and his mother, fighting to survive in a world that didn't seem to care about them. His mother, Beatrice, had worked herself to the bone. During the day, she did alterations at the tailor's shop downstairs. At night, she took in extra sewing work, mending clothes and hemming dresses, until her eyes could barely stay open. Her hands were always rough and worn, covered in tiny cuts from needle pricks. But she never complained. Not once. What Richard remembered most was her humming. No matter how tired she was, no matter how difficult things became, his mother would hum while she worked. Simple melodies, the kind that didn't have names. She would sway gently at her sewing machine, her voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the needle. Those songs had filled their tiny home with warmth and hope, making everything seem a little less dark. "Music is the language of the soul," she used to tell him. "When words fail, music speaks." Richard had believed her. As a child, he had believed everything she said. When he got older and started working, he would give his mother every cent he earned. She would try to refuse, telling him to save his money for his future. But he insisted. "Mama," he would say, "you've done everything for me. Let me do something for you." He had promised himself that when he became successful, he would buy her a real house. A beautiful house, with a garden and a piano in the living room. He would hire someone to cook and clean so she would never have to work again. He would give her everything she had never had. But success didn't come quickly. It took years of struggle, years of failed businesses and near bankruptcy, years of working 18-hour days and sleeping on office floors. By the time he finally made it, by the time the money started flowing in and the world started calling him a genius, his mother was already sick. Cancer. The doctors had found it too late. There was nothing they could do. Richard remembered sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her thin, fragile hand. The treatments had stolen her hair and her strength, but not her spirit. She still smiled at him. She still hummed her little songs, even when her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm so proud of you," she had told him during one of those final visits. "Look what you've become. Look what you've built. I always knew you could do it." "Mama," he had said, his voice breaking, "I was going to buy you a house. I was going to give you everything. I'm sorry I wasn't fast enough. I'm sorry I couldn't." She had squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. "You gave me everything already. You gave me a son who never gave up. That's more than any house could ever be." 1. She had died 3 days later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, while Richard was stuck in traffic on his way to the hospital. He hadn't made it in time to say goodbye. Now, 15 years later, sitting in this ballroom surrounded by wealth and power, Richard felt the full weight of that loss. He had spent the years after her death building his empire even higher, as if success could somehow fill the emptiness inside him. But it never did. No amount of money could bring back his mother. No achievement could replace the sound of her humming. And then this little girl had walked onto the stage, this small, unremarkable child in her simple blue dress, and she had started to play. And the music sounded exactly like the songs his mother used to hum, not the same melodies, of course. These were classical pieces, composed by masters long dead, but the feeling was identical. The warmth, the hope, the sense that everything would be okay, no matter how hard things seemed. Richard felt like his mother was speaking to him through this child, sending him a message from wherever she was now, reminding him of the promise he had made and broken. "Don't you forget where you came from. Don't you forget who believed in you first." He had forgotten. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to remember. The music shifted, becoming quieter and more intimate. Richard looked up to see that the little girl had stopped playing the classical pieces. She was sitting very still, her hands resting in her lap, as if gathering courage for something. Then she leaned toward the microphone that had been set up near the piano. Her small voice echoed through the ballroom, soft but clear. "This last song is for my mama. She works very hard so I can have my dreams. I love her more than anything in the world." A hush fell over the room. Everyone seemed to understand that something important was about to happen. Mei Lin placed her hands on the keys and began to play. This wasn't a piece by Debussy or Chopin or any of the composers she had studied. This was something different. Something original. Something that came from a place so deep inside her that even she didn't fully understand it. She had created this song over the past year, building it note by note during those lonely afternoons in the empty apartment. It had started as a simple melody, just something to play when she was missing her mother. But over time, it had grown into something more. It had become a story. The song began softly, like a lullaby. It was the sound of a mother singing to her child, of warmth and safety and unconditional love. Then it grew more complex, adding layers of emotion. There was sadness in there, the kind that comes from watching someone you love work themselves to exhaustion. There was hope, the kind that keeps you going even when everything seems impossible. There was gratitude, the kind that words can never fully express. And there was something else too, something that made the song different from anything anyone in that room had ever heard. It was the sound of a child's heart, pure and unguarded, and completely honest. It was the sound of someone who had nothing except love, and who gave that love freely and without reservation. In the back of the room, Chen collapsed against the wall, overwhelmed by emotion. She had never heard this song before. She didn't know her daughter had been composing music in secret. The beauty of it, the love contained in every note, was almost too much to bear. At the head table, Richard Harrington felt something break inside him. It was like a dam that had been holding back a flood for 15 years, suddenly crumbled. All the grief he had suppressed, all the guilt he had avoided, all the love he had tried to forget, came rushing out. He was crying openly now, not caring who saw. The sophisticated businessman, the powerful CEO, the man who had built an empire through sheer force of will, sat in his expensive suit, and wept like a child. Because he understood now. He understood what this little girl was saying through her music. She was saying that love was more important than money, that the people who sacrifice for us are worth more than all the gold in the world, that it's never too late to remember who we really are and what really matters. The song built to a crescendo, the notes rising higher and higher until they seemed to touch the ceiling. Then they began to fall, slowly and gently, like petals dropping from a flower. The melody became simpler, returning to that original lullaby theme: a mother's love, a child's gratitude, the circle of life continuing forward. The final notes hung in the air for a long moment, shimmering like stars. Then, silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath. Then Richard Harrington did something that shocked everyone who knew him. He pushed back his chair and rose to his feet. His face was wet with tears, his eyes red and swollen, and he began to clap. The sound of his applause echoed through the silent ballroom like thunder. One person, then another, until the entire room was on its feet, applauding and cheering and wiping their eyes. Maylin sat at the piano, completely stunned. She had expected silence. She had expected confusion, maybe even disappointment. She had never imagined anything like this. She looked out at the sea of faces, all these rich and powerful people who lived in a world so different from her own. And she saw something that made her heart swell. She saw that they were just like her. They had fears and hopes and people they loved. They had struggled and suffered and dreamed. They were human, just like her. And her music had reached them. She climbed down from the piano bench and gave a small bow, the way she had seen performers do in the videos she watched online. The applause grew even louder. Someone whistled. Someone else shouted, "Bravo!" In the back of the room, Chen was being embraced by two other housekeepers who worked at the hotel. They were all crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by what they had just witnessed. "That's your daughter," one of them kept saying. "That's your little girl. Can you believe it?" Chen couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe that the shy child who practiced on cardboard had just moved a room full of millionaires to tears. She couldn't believe that the dreams she had worried would never come true were suddenly, miraculously, coming true right before her eyes. As the applause finally began to fade, Mei Lin looked toward the back of the room, searching for her mother's face. When their eyes met, Chen pressed her hand to her heart and mouthed 3 words: "I love you." Mei Lin's face broke into the biggest smile of her life. She mouthed back, "I love you too, Mama." And in that moment, between a mother and daughter separated by a crowded ballroom, the only thing that mattered was the music that connected their hearts. The evening was not over yet. The most important moment was still to come. But for now, Mei Lin felt something she had never felt before in her young life. She felt like she had arrived. Not at a destination, but at a beginning. The beginning of everything she had ever dreamed about. And it was all because she had the courage to sit down at a piano and let her heart speak.